Hello folks, Larry here again with Curio Mechanics. In today's video we're just going to talk a little bit about PC maintenance, keeping your computer running as best it can, and some tips to basically prolong the life and keep it as working order and running well. There's a few different aspects to this. The first would be the physical side, and the other side would be the software. So let's start with the physical housekeeping. And the biggest enemy is really dust. Electronic equipment creates a small static field, and that will attract dust. Most modern PCs have pretty decent dust filtration, but even then, some does get through. And why this is actually bad, besides of course looking icky, is that it can be in some cases conductive, and it's also an insulator. So things that are normally meant to dissipate heat may not be as efficient. And if it left to a real extensive degree, it can actually, again, cause shorts or intermittent problems. How often to do it really kind of depends on the environment you're in, but every few months at a minimum probably will be okay. It's not something you have to do day after day or every time you dust the living room, but it is something to think about. And if you do have dust filters, obviously those need to be cleaned. The fans themselves will accumulate quite a bit on the fans. So what I usually do to do that is, hopefully you've got an electrostatic safe blower. I don't recommend a vacuum cleaner just because of the static buildup. If you don't have a good safe way to blow the dust out, just get a can of air. And sometimes a anti-static bristle brush will help you kind of blast off some of the more sticky stuff. If you're a smoker, that's something else you want to consider, because it will build up a film that can accumulate dust and be more of an insulator even faster. So stay on top of that. Nothing, like I say, you don't have to go too insane, but it is something to keep in mind. The other physical, I guess, side of it is to watch your cable routing. Over time, you can add more devices, and little by little, those tend to pile up, and usually it's not too bad. But if you're doing a little TLC, consider that a good time to untwangle everything. And, like I say, you don't have to be super crazy about it, but some twisty ties or Velcro wraps go a long way to help making it look better, and you'll actually feel better when it's nice and clean. And it's just it's much a mental health as it is for the health of the PC. But I find that, like I said, keeping the cords untangled and neatly accessible makes it better for you and the machine. Also, labeling things, maybe it makes it easier if you do have to do maintenance or do any physical changes. USB cables are a good example. Just like you say, put a little label on it. If you don't have a labeler, just use masking tape and write on it. It's not that tough, but like I say, a little organization will make it much more accessible and simple. As for the software side, on older machines that use spinning hard drives, a lot of us were used to doing defrags, which kind of moved all the files. And when a computer writes a file to a storage device, it doesn't just put it down in one long line. Even today, it spreads it out. And in fact, with SSDs, it's even more likely to put it all over. But that's actually a good thing on an SSD, because it's sort of load balancing the cells. In an SSD, the individual, we'll just call them chips, storage slots, have a finite number of writes and rewrites. And so by spreading those out, you actually minimize the overusage of certain areas. But where I really want to go with this is on an SSD, you don't want to ever run a defrag on it because it does defeat that load leveling feature. So, but if you're still running a spinning hard drive for whatever reason, and they are a good cheap source of real large storage for a real low cost these days, I definitely still have spinning hard drives in several different machines. I'm not afraid of them, but I'm also not going to trust my life's work to just one. Be aware they have a little bit different lifespan depending on their usage. But so storage maintenance. The other thing you might want to think about is occasionally go through and get rid of software you don't use anymore. And I know it sounds silly, but a lot of the stuff these days starts at boot up or is watching for, some specific kind of a trigger, be it a scanner or a camera, or calling home to the mothership once in a while to verify your legitimate registration. But every one of those tasks still takes up resources. And even though computers are real good about doing things in the background, there's just no reason to have anything unnecessary running. And so just general housekeeping will actually help your computer perform better than it would if you just kept loading stuff on it and never got rid of it. The other thing I'd mention real quick is file storage. Documents, pictures, things like that can become a kind of Fibber McGee's closet. You start throwing stuff in there and don't really pay any attention to how it's organized, and it's fine at first, but what winds up happening is you have a harder time accessing that data, and so it becomes less and less useful. The more you clutter up your closet, the less likely you are to look in your closet if you need something. You may know you have it somewhere, but getting to it can be kind of a struggle. So a couple things I try to do when I'm downloading something, I always make sure the name makes some kind of sense. So if I am looking at it, I have an idea of what it is. And using folder structures, file folders are in computers for a reason. They're one of the most logical ways to organize your stuff. And you don't necessarily have to reinvent the Dewey Decimal System, but you do want to put them in some kind of a place that makes sense. And for the same reason as any physical cleanliness is just that it makes it easier to use in the future. And so maybe think about once in a while going through and renaming or deleting stuff you haven't accessed in a while. You can sort any window by date accessed or date modified. And that's a good way to look for things that are, probably no longer relevant, and go ahead and get rid of them. Storage these days is actually probably at the all-time low price per storage unit, but you still, have a finite amount. There's no reason that you have to go through 4 terabytes of information just to find that picture. So, or another technique I recommend is taking an old computer and using it as kind of a storage server. Nowadays, with remote, networking and computer access to a different machine, it's very, very simple to set up a share, plop everything on that. You don't have to leave the machine running, the old one. But if you got a laptop sitting there doing nothing, putting it in a second place actually makes it far more resilient if it is something you need. So, we used to back up things to USB sticks or tape drives, and it's sort of the same premise. Put it somewhere else, or, put a copy of it somewhere else, just so that if it is one of the more important things in your life and something goes south, it's a pretty good chance that the laptops that's just been sitting there shut off for 6 months will be okay when you fire it back up. And so you have less likely to lose that. So that's just a thought, is to, organize your files. Updates to a system. I know a lot of people find them very, very annoying because they do take time. And as the operating systems evolve, the updates become more extravagant and unfortunately more frequent now that we're in a more security-oriented society these days. but they're good. They're necessary. They wouldn't do it for the fun of it. So I guess just that's something else to put on the list, is just make sure you have all your updates done, and whether you do it on a time cycle or just whenever you see it asks you. I would make sure that's part of your normal maintenance routine. Other physical thing I guess I'd mention is cleaning your keyboard and your mouse. It's kind of surprising how fast a keyboard can build up icky stuff. So I just thought I'd throw that in there. That worst case, turn it upside down and shake it. But if you're going to use a vacuum cleaner, that's the place to do it. Keyboards are relatively static resilient, and if you unplug it before you use it, there's virtually no chance you'll damage it with ESD. So and the other thing, I guess, just the last thing to mention with canned air, it is not air. It is actually a refrigerant. So as much as you might be tempted to have some fun and do crazy things with it, don't. It's actually, I don't want to say a dangerous chemical, but not one you want to be inhaling just for the sake of it. And it definitely won't keep you alive underwater. So just be mindful of that. It's pressurized, but it's not air. But like I say, if you're just looking for a cheap, quick way to clean something up, it is something to consider. So those are just some quick tips. I am still recovering from some stuff going on, so this is a little bit shorter, quicker subject, but hopefully it helps somebody. So thanks very much, and I hope you enjoy your day.